previous video, I talked about the skill modes map, about different ways of working, ways of thinking, which we called the artist, the scientist, the believer, and the technician, the builder. What we need, particularly with those, is because we need all of them at different points within a project or within any kind of change, those different types of skills or mindsets, we need to be clear which one we are using at any given time. And there's a very real discipline required about how to move between them and when to move and to know what happens. Most of the failures that we see in business and elsewhere arise from a lack of discipline in those spaces. And some of them are such clear patterns that I ended up calling them the 7 sins of dubious discipline, because they so commonly reflect failure to move around between the disciplines in a different way, the different domains. So the word sin is not kind of, it's bad, but it's actually, if you look at the historical meaning, it just means ignorance. It means a failure. It means it's not bad, it's not evil. It's just, these are things that we need to watch for and make sure that we resolve. So most of these sins arise from a failure to switch between the modes correctly. So the first one of these is what we call the hype hubris. There's all manner of excitement and hype and big gushing stuff, which is all about the new idea jumping straight to the jumping straight to the builder, saying it can be done, but then leaping straight to the believer, saying that this is the answer. And we see this so much in enterprise architecture, following the latest shiny new toy, the new technology, the new method, the new whatever. We need to focus on, are we following the disciplines correctly? Are we using the right modes in the right sequence and not getting caught up on the hype? The second of these is another variant of it, which is that when we get to the future, or sometimes in the past, there was a golden age. And it's another form of the believer. It's picking up on an idea, usually without even looking at it at all, by going first to the builder, and then rushing straight into, this is the answer. So there's not even looking at the idea at all, it's just saying, this is the answer, completely unexamined. So the risks are incredibly high. The third one is what I sometimes call the new age nuisance, the new age nuisance, if you like. It rhymes with sewage, the discarded remnant of what was once nutritious. Basically, this is a complete failure of discipline of any kind. In fact, not just a failure, it's an active avoidance of discipline. When challenged about the quality of the ideas, they'll jump to the believer and say it's the truth. When challenged about the belief, they will leap to the scientist and say, look, it's been proved by someone else, but I won't bother to give you the references. When challenged about the science, about is it any use, so they will jump to the engineer and say, look, this has been proven somewhere, but I won't tell you where. There's this jumping around that we see, particularly in poor quality work in the consultancy space, where we're leaping to ideas, but we're never actually allowing ourselves to be pinned down to any form of discipline. That's the new age nuisance. The next one is actually a failure mostly in the scientist space. It's called the meaning mistake. And it's when an idea is allowed to go half-baked, where you haven't actually checked everything, but you're leaping straight into production. How many times have we seen this in startups? How many times have we seen this in Agile, where people are leaping into production without having tested it? It's still half-baked. Now, to some extent, if you look at a classic development cycle with initial idea to alpha test to beta test to pre-production to production, that's actually following the disciplines correctly. An alpha test we know isn't going to work. A beta test, it should mostly work, and what we're checking is where it fails. It shouldn't go into production until it's proven. So that's without the fail. The meaning mistake is leaping straight into production. And also another one is where we make an assumption and build a whole structure on it without actually checking that the assumptions were correct. And this happens again a lot. Just as an example, at the time I'm videoing this, the coronavirus pandemic has really shown the fragility of a just-in-time manufacture when half of your supply chain is broken in some way or another. So watch for the assumptions. That's what the meaning mistake and the discipline that we're trying to resolve, that to get out of the meaning mistake, is to check our assumptions at every stage. The next one is what we call the possession problem. And that's that I have the truth. There is a very strong tendency to be the consultant, or the manager is the person who has the truth. And there's no actual check. It's just, I possess this. Likewise, it is correct that I possess the money and therefore you have to do what I say, or we will convert everyone else's investment into money and then I can then take it because I have the rights to the money. There are a lot of rights type problems that arise in that space. Another issue that arises is what we call the reality risk, which is failure to realize that when you're working in an imaginary space, when you're working with new ideas, there is no distinction between real and imaginary. When you're imagining something, it is as if it is real. The danger which occurs in the reality risk is that people will assume that something which they are working with as if true is itself true, and then get upset when it turns out to be true when they thought it was only as if. So there are some real issues here around what is real and what is not. Don't call for things that you would like to be real without realizing the consequences if they become real. We see a lot of that in politics, for example, as well as in business. Another simple example is don't wish for scaling if you're not ready for it. There are very real issues there about being ready for things when they change. And a final one isn't quite so much of a sin as such, but it's one that we see a lot, which is what I call lost in the learning labyrinth. The learning process is not a linear progression. It has a lot of odd starts and finishes. The beginner's luck moment that happens only at the beginning and that we don't get anywhere else again. The classic one of the moment when there's a moment of absolute despair and then sudden breakthrough. And the mistake is thinking that that sudden moment of breakthrough is mastery, when in fact it's only just the beginning of the journeyman's realm. So there are lots of issues around there. So those are 7 different sins, if you like. The hype hubris, about getting lost in the big hype about something. The golden age, which is making a grand assumption that something in the past or something in the imagined future is going to be perfection. The new age nuisance, where there's a complete absence of discipline at all. There is the meaning mistake, where we jump to assumptions and don't check. There is the possession problem, where we believe that we alone have the rights to possess something rather than the responsibilities that go with it. There's the reality risk of failing to make a clear difference between is and as if. Is true, we're certain that something is true, and as if true are very different things. It's really, really important not to mix them up. And the risk of getting lost in the learning labyrinth, the development stage there. Now, there's a lot more in the blog posts and elsewhere that are listed in the description of YouTube. Do have a look at those, because they will really help you avoid these traps in terms of moving around between the different skill sets and modes that are required. So the way we resolve these is we need to keep track of what mode we are in at each time versus the mode that we need to be in at each moment in time, and move cleanly between them according to how we're doing it. So that's the 7 sins diagnostic. It's a useful, if very disturbing at times, diagnostic to help avoid some of the traps that we walk into. Thanks for watching. Do look at the YouTube description for links to further detail. And don't forget to subscribe for other videos, and also to support us on Patreon to help us produce these videos and the tools themselves.